just as you don't view there to be a really substantive, interesting distinction between physics and philosophy, at least in these areas, you also view physics and metaphysics as being very closely connected.
Yeah, that's an understatement, but go on.
Well, after I finish, you should elaborate on that. But there are still some questions that might at least traditionally be cast in the metaphysics camp that are very close to the directionality question that are worth discussing right now. And there are many, but a couple I'll just start with are, does time have a rate? What does it mean to say that time flows?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, so let me start. And again, I've probably said this is a standard rant of mine, but okay.
We love this.
What is metaphysics? Because people say, is this a metaphysical question or a physical question? That is a very bad distinction that doesn't make any sense. So let's just walk back for a second. What is metaphysics? Because people, what they're reacting to is the idea is that metaphysics is super physics or beyond physics, or
it's the study of ghosts.
After physics, right? Yeah. I mean, again, you go into the bookstore and if you look at the metaphysics, you'll get a bunch of stuff about Kabbalah or God knows what, Exactly.
Parapsychology.
Exactly. That's metaphysics. Nope. Wrong, right? Metaphysics, the term metaphysics was a title attached to something that Aristotle wrote, which the document does not contain the word metaphysics. So if you were to go up to Aristotle in the street and say, hey, Aristotle, what's your metaphysics? He'd say, metaphysics? What the hell is metaphysics? Never heard of it, right?
Isn't the story that one of his catalogers, like Andronicus of Rhodes, do I have the name right? Andronicus of Rhodes, that he cataloged all of Aristotle's work, then the physics was last, and there was some leftover stuff, so he titled that Ata Metataphysica, which is metaphysics, after physics.
This is a story that goes around. I heard that story when I was a tadpole, as you did. I don't think that's true. So Let's talk about the real situation. The real situation is, yes, it was a later editor who was collecting together the extant manuscripts of Aristotle into volumes, right? That's the way we now have them. And it is that later editor who stuck the name metaphysics on this set of writings of Aristotle. And the really kind of funny idea was, he kind of had all these volumes in front of him, and okay, here's the physics. I don't know what to call that. That's sitting next to physics. I'll call it metaphysics, right? It's the thing after physics, like literally on the shelf after physics or something like that. No, that's not right. But let's get clear exactly what is right. So you have to look at this manuscript of Aristotle's and first ask, what does he call it? He doesn't call it metaphysics. And there are three main things he calls it. One thing he calls it is first philosophy, which doesn't give you much of a clue. It gives you some clue that this is about fundamental, what's really fundamental, right? What's first. But that doesn't really give you a lot of detail about the content of it. However, and this is where I'm going to, say that's why this kind of silly story isn't right. Aristotle explicitly in the book we call Physics calls that second philosophy. So first, second. Okay. I mean, Aristotle himself saw a very close relation. Now, another rant, a new one. I haven't made this rant nearly as many times. There's this other manuscript of Aristotle, which we call Aristotle's Physics. We only call that for Aristotle, okay? Other Greeks wrote things which have exactly the same title, and we don't call them physics. We call them On Nature, right? We translate, because that's what physis in Greek means, is nature. The study of nature is the study of natural phenomena, as opposed to what? Artificial phenomena, for example. We make that distinction between natural and artificial. So the if we had our heads on straight, which we don't, we would never call it Aristotle's physics, because from the way we use the word physics, that's extremely misleading from the get-go. We would say Aristotle's lectures on nature. And Aristotle tells you what he means by a nature, by something being natural. A nature is an intrinsic source of motion and rest. So this book, it can move. Right now, it's moving up. That's not natural for it, right? That's a forced motion. That's an artificial motion. It's not intrinsic to the book. You want to know what the book does naturally? Let go of it. That's natural. Its natural motion for Aristotle is to fall. But of course, Aristotle, when he talked about natural things, mostly what he had in mind was biology. He wrote more biology than anything else. Hell of a lot of marine biology, history of animals, parts of animals, all kinds of biological things. All of that for him was physis. It was natural science. So what we call Aristotle's physics is a bad name. We should call it Aristotle's natural science. A nature is an intrinsic motion of principle of motion and rest. The metaphysics, first philosophy, has a broader scope. It sort of contains natural science as a subpart, but it's broader. Why? Because there are things that exist that don't move at all, like mathematical objects. I mean, in lambda and mu of the metaphysics, he goes into mathematics. So those things don't have natures because they don't move. So he calls it first philosophy. Another thing he calls it in it is theology. That's because he has a God-like element, the prime mover, the unmoved mover, active mind. Okay, that's part of it, but we don't think of metaphysics as just that, right? And the main thing he calls it, the thing that tells you what it really is the theory of being qua being. As we said, the theory of being as such. That qua is Latin, Greek, is hey. The theory of what exists merely insofar as it exists. The theory of the fundamental types of existence. That's what metaphysics is. Question: does what we call physics address some of that subject matter? Sure it does, right? When physics tells you that there are hydrogen atoms and they're made up of a proton and an electron, that's telling you part of what there is, fundamentally. Physics is a sub-part of metaphysics because it's doing ontology. I wrote a book called The Metaphysics Within Physics exactly for this reason, that physics, insofar as it contains postulates or hypotheses about what fundamentally exists, is part of metaphysics by definition. So to make a division there is to make a mistake. Now you can make a division within physics between the things that are postulated that we're really pretty sure about and the things that might be postulated that are much more speculative. You can make a distinction between the things that are postulated that we have pretty direct experimental evidence for and the things that are postulated that we don't have very direct. From that point of view, strings, of course, go on the speculative side. We have no direct experimental evidence for them. So maybe you call them metaphysics, but but now you're making really a distinction in confirmation theory. How strong is the evidence we have to believe in these things? First, you want to understand what is it you're postulating, right? Before I can even ask, what's the evidence for it? The evidence for what, right? What is your theory postulating? So when people say, oh, that's not physics, that's metaphysics, maybe all they mean is that's not well-confirmed hypothesis tied to experimental outcomes. That's speculative. That's okay. That's a good distinction. And you should be more leery of more speculative stuff. But that's not a distinction between physics and some other spooky realm, right?